China Renee Videon was born on November 30th, 1982. In the fall of 1998, 16-year-old China was a junior at Riverdale High School and lived near Murfreesboro, Tennessee in Christiana. She was a good student who was described as your average teenager. Unfortunately, she would never make it to her senior year because she strangely vanished one day. On October 19, 1999, after school that day, China went to the Bilo grocery store where she worked in Murfreesboro to pick up her paycheck. She then went to visit her mother, Suzanne, at the Just Image beauty salon in Christiana. Her plans after that were to run back by the grocery store to buy some groceries and then fill her 1999 Mazda Protege up with gas. She also said she might stop by her friend Angela Matthews' home, but she wasn't completely sure. When Suzanne arrived home later that day, her daughter was not there. She checked with Angela, who said they were supposed to hang out, but she never showed up. China didn't have a cell phone, but did own a pager, but she wasn't returning her mother's calls. When she was reported missing, it was thought that she had run away with a man. Investigators had a report that she was seen at the Golden Gallon convenience store in Murfreesboro, but by the time police arrived to collect their surveillance footage, it had already been overwritten. When she was seen, she was with two men named Chris and TJ, who were managers at the Bilo where she worked. 8 months later, in June 2000, her car was found abandoned at an apartment complex in Nashville, Tennessee. To the investigators' surprise, the groceries she bought the day she went missing were still inside. Unfortunately, the car had been wiped clean and no evidence was found. In 2015, investigators said they had identified two people who are responsible for her presumed murder. Those two people were the managers from Bilo, Chris and TJ. Chris now lives in Alabama, while TJ lives in South Carolina. When China disappeared, she had a scar on her right knee and a tattoo of a blue butterfly on her right hip. China went missing on October 19, 1999, and as of November 2024, she remains missing, and this case is unsolved. Diana Dawn Vicari was born on August 10, 1973, to Kathy Pashos and Tom Vicari. She was described as a good listener who was always friendly and easygoing. She loved music, especially the band Pearl Jam. After high school, she enrolled at Pima Community College in Tucson, Arizona, with aspirations to become a marine biologist. In 1992, she was living in Tucson with a female roommate and was working 2 jobs to pay for college. However, she wanted to do school full-time and was making plans to move back home, but sadly, she never got the chance. On October 22nd, she attended her drama college class at Palo Verde High School. Afterwards, she drove a classmate home and was then seen in the parking lot of the Tucson Convention Center. A rock concert was being held at the center that night, and Diana was allegedly there looking for her friends. Sometime after midnight, she was seen one last time at a nightclub called the New Orleans. When she failed to show up for work the following day, which for her was extremely unusual, her boss called her mother, Kathy. Since Diana was moving, she had already disconnected her phone, forcing Kathy to call her friends in an attempt to find her. She then thought that maybe she had confused Diana's work schedule, so she called Iggy's, but unfortunately, she wasn't there either. At that point, she knew something was seriously wrong and called the police and reported her missing. Not long after, Kathy saw a bulletin on TV about 2 arms found in a dumpster the day before. She knew immediately they belonged to Diana, and she was right. Kathy identified the arms as her daughter's by the ring on the hand, which had belonged to her father, and she always wore it. 2 days later, her 1981 gray Ford Mustang was found parked in the 100 block of West La Osa Street. Her purse, books, and other belongings were still inside. As for Diana's remains, they've never been located. Her presumed murder was connected to Lemuel Prion, who was accused of kidnapping and sexually assaulting 35-year-old Tabitha Armenta. In August 1993, investigators spoke to Troy Olson, a bartender who worked in the area where Diana was last seen alive. When they showed him photos of both Diana and Lemuel, he recognized her, saying she had been at the bar 2 days before her arms were found, but he couldn't identify Lemuel. However, 2 years later, in 1995, newspapers ran the story of Lemuel and noted that he was the prime suspect in the case. After seeing it, Troy called investigators and said he now remembered Lemuel. On October 31, 1997, he was indicted for the murder, kidnapping, and aggravated assault of Diana. 2 years later, in January of 1999, Lemuel was found guilty and sentenced to death. However, in August of 2002, the Arizona Supreme Court overturned the conviction because he was tried in the same trial for Diana's murder and the assault on Tabitha. All the charges were then dismissed. One of the biggest reasons for the dismissal is that the jury never heard about another suspect named John Mazur. He worked with Diana at the restaurant she worked at, and he was disciplined for sexually harassing female coworkers. He then lied to the police about it when he was questioned. Another time, he lured a coworker back to his apartment and attempted to sexually assault her. He even once bit a woman's nose during a fight. He also worked at another place that y'all might recognize, the New Orleans, which coincidentally was the last place Diana was seen on the night she disappeared. He was actually on shift that night, but lied to investigators about it. However, a doorman at the club testified that Diana had come by specifically to meet Mazur, and they were even seen together that night. Plus, he had moved into a new apartment on the day she went missing, which was very close to where her Mustang was found. Interestingly, when he showed up the following day for work, he was so disheveled and disoriented that he was immediately fired. His car was searched, but nothing was found, and he hasn't been investigated since. Kathy sadly died in 2000 without ever finding out what happened to her daughter. Diana was dismembered and murdered in late October 1992, and as of November 2024, this case remains unsolved. Kimberly Rownette Croft was born on October 30th, 1967. She was described as a very caring individual who was known for her infectious laugh. In high school, she was a very popular cheerleader, and by August of 1986, she had enough credits to graduate and begin working at McDonald's. In the spring of 1987, a now 19-year-old Kim was living in Ringgold and had been dating a man for the last 2 years named Randall DeLoach that her family loved. However, after they broke up, she began dating a white man named Jamie Davis, which kind of surprised her family. In late January or early February of 1987, Kim's father found out that she and Davis spent the night at a motel. It's unclear if he kicked her out or she left, but she then began staying at the motel for about 2 weeks before moving in with her aunt and uncle, Jarvis and Jean Suggs. On March 11th, Kim told her aunt that she was stepping out for a while. After leaving their home, she was seen with a white male in a pickup truck, which was most likely Davis. At 5:30 the following morning, a waitress arriving for work at the Country Bumpkin restaurant found her body. She had sex before being murdered, but the examiner was unable to determine if she was sexually assaulted or not. What they could tell for sure is that her killer strangled her to death. However, when her family saw her body, they noticed she had bruises on her head and a bloodied nose. This led them to believe she had been sexually assaulted by more than one man. When her sister, Lavonda, who was still in high school, returned to classes, she began receiving anonymous notes from classmates with leads on them about the case because they were too afraid to come forward. Those leads were then given to investigators. Her ex-boyfriend, Randall, was questioned but had a solid alibi and was ruled out. Her family continued to believe Davis was responsible and were shocked in 1993 when her uncle-in-law, Jarvis Suggs, was arrested and charged with her murder. Investigators had come to the Suggs house and collected bed sheets, garbage, and hair samples. They also collected fiber particles from Suggs' car. As for Davis, investigators said he was extensively questioned and had his blood examined, but they couldn't find any links to the crime scene evidence. However, Kim's uncle, Jack Croft, testified that he saw scratches on Davis's face 2 days after the murder. However, investigators say they questioned him on the day Kim's body was found and saw no scratches on him at all. In 1994, a jury found him not guilty. Kim's family believes Davis was never fully investigated because he's the son of a wealthy businessman. However, the former sheriff of Catoosa County, Phil Summers, who retired in 2012 after 22 years on the job, said that all potential suspects named by the victim's family were investigated. It was also pointed out that hair and blood samples were taken from all suspects, including DNA, and pointed to Suggs as the killer. Kim's family still claims the original investigators ignored evidence, but it's unclear what evidence that is. With the passing of the Coleman-Baker Act, they were able to petition the sheriff's office to reopen the case and were allowed to examine some of the evidence themselves. Allegedly, what they found supported their request to reopen the case. Sadly, Kim was murdered on March 12, 1987, and as of November 2024, this case remains unsolved. Maxine Tori Bitomski was born on June 25, 1919. In 1993, 73-year-old Maxine, now a widow after her husband Rudolph died, lived alone in Kittery, Maine. On January 15, 1993, her granddaughter, Candace Cavaretta, came by to check on her and then called her later that evening. When she spoke with Maxine, she said she was getting ready to go to bed. However, she began watching a televised Kittery, Maine town council meeting and spoke to a friend on the phone until it was almost midnight. The following morning, a Portsmouth Herald delivery driver approached Maxine's house to drop off her newspaper when he noticed the side door was ajar and one of its window panes shattered. Neighbors also saw the broken glass, but no one called the police. It wasn't until her grandson, George Whitealong, came by at around 5:15 p.m. that her nude body was found in the bathtub. Investigators found large footprints outside and broken pieces of furniture inside. She was found with bruising on her hands, wrist, and chin, but a cause of death has never been released to the public. A year later, a woman out gardening found a plastic Kmart bag underneath a bush just a short distance from Maxine's home. Inside were tissues, candy wrappers, pajamas, a robe, and an inhaler with Maxine's name on it. In 2022, thanks to new DNA technology, they were able to identify a potential suspect who was originally questioned by investigators at the time of the murder. However, that person's name has not been released to the public, but hopefully they'll be able to solve the case soon. Maxine was killed in cold blood on January 15, 1993, and as of November 2024, this case remains unsolved. Stella Anastasia Evon was born of Yupik Eskimo descent on February 11, 1979. In 1996, 17-year-old Stella was living with her grandparents in Bethel, Alaska, and was described as a kind and loving individual who was known for laughing and having fun. On the night of September 29, 1996, Stella and her friends went out for the night, but when she arrived back home at 2 a.m., she couldn't wake her grandmother and didn't have a key to get in. Her grandmother was under the impression that she planned to stay the night at a friend's home. Stella then decided to walk across the street to the police station to ask for help. After an officer was also unable to wake her grandmother, he offered Stella a ride into town. He then drove her 2.5 miles to her sister's apartment complex in downtown Bethel, dropping her off at about 4:30 a.m. She stayed at her sister's for less than an hour before leaving to see if her grandmother was awake yet. She said she was catching a ride with a male friend at the nearby store. Sadly, after leaving, Stella was never heard from again. The last time her sister saw her, she was standing at the store waiting for a ride. Stella stood 4'11" and weighed about 100 pounds. She has long black hair and brown eyes. When she disappeared, Stella was wearing a dark blue hoodie sweatshirt with a Georgetown University logo across the front, a brown leather jacket, and blue jeans. She went missing on September 30th, 1996, and as of November 2024, she has never been found, and this case remains unsolved. This is the case of the Rockwood Jane Doe, who has finally been identified. But first, a quick recap of her story. On August 28, 2005, a biker pulled over at a rest stop in Aramosa Township, Ontario, and discovered something horrifying. Underneath a sleeping bag behind the rest stop were the decomposed remains of an unknown female. Unfortunately, her cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of her remains. Investigators were at least able to get the Jane Doe's fingerprints, a dental imprint, and a sample of her DNA. Still, her identity would remain unknown for another 20 years. In 2024, with the help of Othram, she was identified as Tammy Eileen Penner, who was 41 years old at the time of her death. Before that, she was living in Chilliwack and Abbotsford, British Columbia. She was reported missing on February 7, 2005, about 6 months before her remains were found. It's still believed that she was a victim of domestic violence due to her broken left cheek and nose and injury to her left eye socket that had healed before her death. Officials are hoping that someone will come forward who recognizes Tammy and help determine why she was in Ontario and possibly who she was with. When she was still unidentified, Acton resident Keith Porty built a bench overlooking Tammy's memorial that the Rockwood Knights of Columbus had created. Also, a woman in town would go to the memorial site weekly to clean out the weeds and polish the stones. She's very thankful that Tammy finally has her name back. The people of Acton who took care of Tammy while she waited for science to catch up are truly amazing.